In this video, I'm going to pit the Acer C720P-2666 Chromebook on the left here against the Samsung XE550C22 Series 5 550 Chromebook on the right here in the first round of the ChromeClash. So let's get to it. Now, in my previous ChromeClash video, I did a preliminary face-off between the Acer C720P and its predecessor. But now it's time to pit the Acer Chromebook against my Samsung Chromebook. The Samsung Series 5 550 is no longer on the market, but prior to the Chromebook Pixel launching, this Chromebook was the best Chromebook you could get your hands on. But technology marches on, so we're going to see how this Chromebook fares against one of the more modern Chromebooks on the market. Now, as I did in the preliminary round, we're going to start off with some subjective comparisons between these two devices. And we're going to start off with the way they look. Now, obviously, just by looking at them, you can see that the Samsung is a little bit bigger, but we'll get into the dimensions in a minute. The Acer Chromebook is a gunmetal color, whereas the Samsung is a silver color. They're very similar in style in that they both have the Chrome branding in the upper left-hand corner, and then they have their respective manufacturer branding below that. Personally, I prefer the way the Acer Chromebook looks, only because the Samsung Chromebook looks a little bit too much like Apple laptops. And I'm really not a fan of the way Apple laptops look. They're a little too bland for my liking. I prefer laptops that have their own look. Of course, as I mentioned, Samsung no longer makes this Chromebook, and the Chromebooks they have on the market have their own style, which I definitely appreciate. Now, both of these devices were built not to be user accessible. You can open them up on the bottom here. You can just, unscrew the bottom and access the innards that way, but they're really not meant to be upgraded in any way. The same thing is true over here. As you can see, the battery is not accessible. Again, of course, you can always get in here, but it's not designed to be upgraded. On the Acer, you have a couple of LEDs up front here, 2 LEDs, and on the Samsung, you just have one right by the power port here. So taking a look at the keyboards, you'll notice that they're both pretty much identical. There are a couple of small differences, for instance, the arrow keys, the way they look. But other than that, the layout is identical, and that's the characteristic Chromebook keyboard on both devices. Both of these laptops were built from the ground up to be Chromebooks, unlike some Chromebooks out there that were converted from Windows machines. The keyboards on both devices feel really good. I would have to say overall the Samsung actually has a better build quality though, because there's really very little flex in the keyboard and on the touch area. On the Acer, there's some flex on the palm rest, on the keyboard, on the touchpad. On the Samsung, there's much less give. The palm rests on the Samsung are actually made out of metal. The top is plastic, but the palm rests are metal. Over here on the Acer, everything's plastic. You'll also notice that you get a larger touchpad on the Samsung, and it seems to be of a better quality. Although, as far as performance goes, I haven't noticed any difference between the two. Now, I always like to find out how far a laptop will open up. So let's push these back. I don't know if you can tell, but the Acer does go back further. The Samsung doesn't go back quite as far. That's as far back as it goes. Now you might be noticing a little bit of a flicker on the Samsung screen, but you don't see that in person. That's just something between the Chromebook and the camera. So I turned both Chromebooks off just so you could see that the Acer Chromebook has a glossy screen and the Samsung Chromebook has a matte screen. Personally, I prefer matte screens, although I've never seen a capacitive touch screen that wasn't glossy, and the Acer has a 10-point capacitive touchscreen on it. So there's really no way around it. But for the record, I really prefer matte screens. Now, the Acer C720P currently retails for $299. When the Samsung Series 5 550 was brand new, it retailed for $449. So basically $150 more. And again, because it was the top of the line Chromebook when it actually launched. Now, as you can tell, both Chromebooks have different size screens on them. The Acer has an 11.6-inch screen, and the Samsung has a 12.1-inch screen. But interestingly enough, the Acer has slightly more pixels on its screen. The resolution is 1366 by 768. The resolution on the Samsung is 1280 by 800. So the Samsung screen is actually taller and more narrow than the Acer screen. Both screens are LCD with an LED backlight. Again, the Acer is a touchscreen with 10 points of touch, and it's a active matrix TFT display. Now, the screen on the Samsung is a super bright display. That's actually the trade name that Samsung gives the display. Now, the Acer Chromebook is slightly lighter than the Samsung Chromebook. And just by looking at them, you'd guess that's the case because the Samsung Chromebook looks a little bit more massive. The Acer actually weighs 2.98 pounds. The Samsung weighs 3.3 pounds. And for those of you outside of the United States, that's 1.35 kilos over here and 1.48 kilos over here. The Samsung, as you can see, is slightly taller. The Acer is actually 8 inches in height, and the Samsung is 8.5 inches in height. Again, for those of you outside of the United States, the Acer is 20.32 centimeters in height, and the Samsung is 21.59 centimeters in height. They're actually very similar in width. The Acer is 11.3 inches. The Samsung is 11.5 inches. That's 28.702 centimeters on the Acer and 29.21 centimeters on the Samsung. Interestingly enough, they're both the exact same thickness, and that's 0.8 inches or 2.032 centimeters. Now, both Chromebooks are equipped with 802.11a, b, g, and n for the Wi-Fi. The newer Chromebook, the Acer, actually is also equipped with Bluetooth. It's Bluetooth 4.0 HS. The Samsung is not equipped with Bluetooth. Both Chromebooks are also equipped with an HD webcam and a microphone. Now, both Chromebooks are equipped with an SD card slot. And that should pretty much be expected because I haven't run into a Chromebook that doesn't have an SD card slot. But we're actually going to test it out like I did in the preliminary video because some Chromebooks allow for the SD card to go in all the way. Other Chromebooks only fit the SD card in halfway. So let's try out the SD card slot on the Acer, which is right here. And let's put this SD card in there, and as you can see, it does not go in all the way. Now, the SD card slot on the Samsung actually has a little door over it. So let's put the SD card in there. And that one fits in a little bit further, but not all the way. When it sticks out like that, not really a fan, but at least this goes in a little bit further than on the Acer. So let's check out the other ports on these Chromebooks. Of course, you have your SD card slot here, you have a USB 2.0, and a Kensington lock. On the other side, you have your power port here, you have an HDMI port, you have a USB 3.0, and then you have your combo mic and headphone jack here. Over on the Samsung, you have, of course, your SD card slot, you have a USB 2.0, you have your Kensington lock, you have your power port, you have a full gigabit Ethernet port here, you have a display port, you have another USB 2.0, and then you have your combo microphone and headphone jack here. So both devices have two USB ports on them, But the Acer, obviously being a newer device, has one USB 3.0 port on it. Now, of course, you have an HDMI port over on the Acer and a display port over on the Samsung. That display port is compatible with HDMI, DVI, or VGA if you have an adapter. Another difference is obviously the Samsung has that gigabit Ethernet port. Unlike the Acer, the Samsung did come in a 3G version. This one is not the 3G version, but it does have a little door back here which actually works on this one. And as you can see there's the SIM card slot there. So that's going to do it for the subjective part of this comparison. So far I've highlighted the differences between the devices, but all of that stuff is just personal preference. Let's get down to the objective part of this comparison. We're going to find out which device performs better than the other. And let's start with the processor. The Acer has an Intel Celeron 2955U dual-core processor clocked at 1.4 GHz per core. The Samsung has an Intel Celeron 867 dual-core processor clocked at 1.3 GHz per core. So just judging by clock speed alone, the Acer is going to be a faster device. But if you throw on top of that the Acer is running the latest generation of Intel Celeron processors, which is a Haswell-based CPU, and the Samsung is running an older version, you're going to notice a lot of perks with the newer device here. Namely, increased graphics performance and, of course, better battery performance as well. Now, I don't do battery tests on this channel, but I can tell you anecdotally that you're going to get more battery life out of the Acer than you're going to get out of the Samsung. And that's interesting because the Acer actually has a smaller battery in it. It has a 3-cell lithium polymer battery that's rated at 3,950 milliamps. They say it will give you 7.5 hours of battery life. The Samsung has a 4-cell lithium polymer battery. So again, a bigger battery, and it's rated at 6,800 milliamps. So just short of 3,000 milliamps more capacity on the Samsung, but you do get less battery life. And that's because you're running an older chipset. But it's also a testament to the Haswell-based processor in the Acer. It's a much more efficient chipset. Now, for the record, they say that you can get 6 hours of battery life out of the Samsung. And the reason I mention that is because this is an older device. It came out about a year and a half before this one did. And if you know anything about battery technology, the more you charge a battery, the less performance you're going to get out of it. So in comparison between the two devices, like I said before, this will give you more battery life. But when this was brand new, it was rated for 6 hours, and this brand new is rated for 7.5 hours. So again, if both of these devices were brand new right now, you'd still get better battery life out of the Acer. Now, even though the Acer has a better processor in it, it's actually running less RAM. It has 2 gigabytes of DDR3L SD RAM. The Samsung is running 4 gigabytes of DDR3 SD RAM. So we're going to see how that factors into the performance of these devices. The Acer is going to give you a larger SSD. It's actually equipped with 32 gigabytes of onboard storage. The Samsung has a 16 gigabyte SSD in it, and that's pretty much standard for most Chromebooks on the market. So let's fire up both of these Chromebooks at the same time and see if one powers up before the other. In 3, 2, 1. Okay, it looks like the Acer fired up just a little bit quicker than the Samsung. So I have the same background pulled up on both machines here. And there's a slight difference. I don't know if you can see it, but I'll explain it to you just in case you can't. Over on the Samsung, in the sky here, you see a little bit more of a red tone, whereas over here, it's mostly blue. So there's a little bit difference in color reproduction, but both screens are very crisp. So let's bring up the brightness on both of these devices and bring it up all the way. Now, you can probably notice that the Samsung is a little bit brighter than the Acer. And that's because the Samsung is a 300 nit screen and the Acer is a 183 nit screen. So on paper, the Acer, again, has a little bit more pixels on the screen. The Samsung has a different aspect ratio. It's taller and thinner than the Acer. The Samsung is a little bit brighter, and of course it has the matte screen, but the Acer is a multi-touch panel, and you can do 10 touch points on it. So as far as I'm concerned, one screen isn't superior to the other. I will say that I'm personally partial to the Samsung screen, only because it's a little bit bigger, it's a little bit brighter, and it's a matte screen. And quite honestly, I never find myself using the touch screen on the Acer Chromebook. You might be different, but personally, I just haven't gotten used to it. And there aren't any applications that really take advantage of it. Now, before we finish up with the screens, let's just take a look at the viewing angles here. Pretty comparable on the horizontal, pretty comparable on the vertical. So it looks like you get some decent viewing angles on both devices. Okay, up next we're going to do the stereo speaker test. Now, both of these devices are equipped with stereo speakers, which is nice because some laptops only have mono speakers. As I did in my preliminary ChromeClash video, I have my TechHarvest welcome video pulled up on both devices. And it's only 30 seconds long, so I'm going to play it, and I'm going to judge which device has better sound. Now, both of them have the speaker placement in the same spot. It's on the underside, on either side of the palm rest area. So your speakers will bounce off of a table if you have it on a table, and it should amplify the sound a little bit. Now, it's going to be difficult, I'm filming this, so you're not going to get the pure sound that you would if you would be listening to it in person. So I'll try and give you my impressions of it, but you'll be able to discern some of the quality by listening to it for yourself. So let's start with the Acer, and let's make sure the sound is cranked all the way up. Okay, it sounded pretty good. I did notice one little video hiccup toward the end there, ever so slightly. And let's make sure that the sound is cranked up all the way. And let's press play on this one. Okay, I had the same little video hiccup on this toward the end of the video there that I had on the Acer, and interestingly enough, I had it in my previous ChromeClash video. So I'm beginning to think that it is an encoding error on the actual video itself. As far as the video quality, it's pretty much identical on both Chromebooks here. However, the audio quality is much better on the Samsung. They both have a full quality to them, but the Samsung has a clearer sound to it and a slightly louder sound. In fact, this Samsung Chromebook has the best sound on it out of all of my Chromebooks that I own. So up next, we're going to do some benchmarks, and we're going to start with Peacekeeper. And I'm going to run these at the same time, side by side. So let's click on this in 3, 2, 1. Okay, obviously the Acer finished first, but the Samsung wasn't far behind. As far as the scores go, however, there's a big difference. The Acer scored 3001. The Samsung scored 2006. So almost a full 1/3 higher score over on the Acer than on the Samsung. Up next, we're going to do the SunSpider 1.0.2 JavaScript benchmark. And again, we're going to run them side by side at the same time. So in 3, 2, 1. Now, in this test, a lower score is better because the score is based on the time it took for the computer to run the test. Over here on the Acer, it scored 318.7 milliseconds with a plus or minus of 1.1%. Over on the Samsung, it scored 425.0 milliseconds at a plus or minus of 0.9%. So the Acer, again, was faster, and it completed the test in over 100 milliseconds faster than the Samsung. Okay, the final benchmark we're going to do is Psychedelic by Microsoft. Now, this benchmark generally gives the closest results between devices. So as always, let's run these things side by side at the same time in 3, 2, 1. All right, just as I said, closest score yet. You have 1815 on the Acer Chromebook and 1810 on the Samsung Chromebook. There's one more mode to try, and that's the hallucinogenic mode. So let's try that in 3, 2, 1. Another close one. The Acer scored 613 and the Samsung scored 610. Now, I just can't do a video on the Acer C720P without showing you the touchscreen. So I have my YouTube page pulled up here, and there you go. Touchscreen is very responsive. Again, it's not something that I use regularly, but if you're going to buy this device, more likely than not, you want it for the touchscreen. So for those of you interested, the touchscreen works perfectly. Now, since this is a competition between devices, I have to declare a winner. One of these devices will move on. The other one I'm going to put up on eBay because I don't need 5 Chromebooks. I already sold the predecessor to this Acer, so only one can move on. So here's where my head is at. I actually prefer the Samsung Chromebook over the Acer Chromebook in pretty much every way. Again, I'm not a huge fan of the Samsung design because it borrows a lot from Apple's design. But other than that, I like the size, I like the screen, I like the large touchpad, I like the better build quality, I really like the speakers. Again, the best speakers on any Chromebook that I own. As you saw in the comparison, the Acer outperformed the Samsung, but not by a lot. The Samsung is still a very capable Chromebook. However, there's one deal breaker with the Samsung, and that's the battery life. Sure, the battery life is decent. I think on average I get about 3 hours out of it. But I get a lot more battery life out of the Acer. So even though I prefer the Samsung in pretty much every way, I'm going to have to say that the Acer C720P is going to advance in this tournament. Sure, I'm going to get a device with a glossy screen, with a smaller screen, with slightly less build quality, but that battery life is key. But again, at the end of the day, you can't go wrong with either one of these devices. I wish I could keep them both, but it's really not practical. So that's going to do it for this video. In my next ChromeClash, I'm going to give the Acer a break because I'm going to pit my HP Chromebook against my Lenovo Chromebook. So stay tuned for that. So as always, if you have any questions or comments, please post them down below. If you like what you see, please subscribe. If you want to help out my channel, give me a thumbs up, favorite this video, or share this video. So thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you guys next time.